Hello to our today's lecture about sustainable entrepreneurship. It's a pretty wide topic and I certainly cannot cover everything in this lecture. I show you a few examples how we with research did approach this topic, sustainable entrepreneurship, what it is. I mean, we speak about sustainability, which is a really fuzzy word. The definitions are rather unclear and we have to consider it from several perspectives. But let's start with an example how difficult this topic is. And in simulating dilemma situations, in research, we often use game theory. There are different game theoretical models, the prisoner's dilemma, volunteer's dilemma, or the chicken dilemma. They have all something in common because players in strategy simulated in game theory or game theoretical approaches can achieve different payoffs, can win or lose, have different choices, but often the most favorite or interesting or the choice with the best payoff is often the choice in that cooperating with others but defecting with others. Let's take the example of a volunteer's dilemma. A volunteer's dilemma may appear when you have an accident on the street and someone gets heavily injured, is lying on the street. And there are 20 people around. Surely everyone would feel better if the guy on the street being injured would be helped. But that also carries some costs. You could make something wrong in helping, you could hurt the guy in helping, you make yourself dirty when helping. So, whereas the payoff of everyone would be very high if someone is helping, the one who really helps has a lower payoff because this guy is also carrying some costs. That's the dilemma situation because the favorite strategy is to wait until the point someone else is helping and then everyone feels well. So let's come to the prisoner's dilemma. In the prisoner's dilemma, it's around the same story. You have two prisoners that are caught for little crime. Maybe they were stealing something in a supermarket and they were caught, and it would be enough to imprison them for maybe a month at a maximum. But as police, you suspect them to have done this crime several times in supermarkets. You went to supermarkets and you have stolen many things, but you cannot prove it. You don't have evidence for that. You actually need the prisoners to confess that. And then you put them into different rooms and you talk to them and you want them to confess. What's the strategy of the prisoner? And surprisingly, the best strategy of the prisoner is in the situation to confess and betray the other one. Because that's the most favorable situation to be. There is no better choice independently what the other is doing. And that's also called a Nash equilibrium. Nash, you remember the movie A Beautiful Mind, got the Nobel Prize in economics for developing and creating, describing, defining this equilibrium, this situation. And the equilibrium appears here at the prisoner's dilemma for each of the prisoners at confess and betray. There is another equilibrium described in the literature about it. That's a Pareto optimum, but we don't have a Pareto optimum, which would be a situation where whatever happens, any other choice would not make someone better and the other one not worse. That's the prisoner's dilemma. Just imagine a prisoner's dilemma for this environmental situation we are in. Isn't it always better to run for economic profits, to exploit nature and humans for your own profit, for your own success? Isn't that always the better strategy, independently what others do, defecting and betraying, better than cooperating and creating mutual collective goods? It is a situation. And the payoff structure is exactly the same. It doesn't matter what the other does. For you, the most favorite strategy in an economic system which requires you to achieve profits will always be going for profits and exploiting nature and humans. Though there might even be a divergence or even contradiction between collective and individual interests. We all have interests that nature is protected, that we have more social societies, that the social and development goals are fulfilled or we are going towards that. But that's a collective vision. Individually, it looks very different. Individually, we strive for our own wealth, for our own economic success, for our own individual success, and that might be different and contradictory to the collective ones. Even single individual wishes might be contradictory. I might wish being economically successful, earning a lot of money. At the same time, I also want to protect the environment. It's nice, can happen, but there are many wishes and demands we have that are next to each other and are contradictory. We also can ask if economic growth and protecting environment and fulfilling social needs go to the same time and the same speed and in parallel. So there are many divergent developments, there are many contradictory developments. Can we actually escape a green prison where the favorite strategy always is to defecting, betraying others for their own purpose, whether it's individual, it's a company, it's a nation, or it's an economy as Europe, Northern America, or China? Can we really escape it? It will be difficult because gaining economic advantages by having a sustainable transition will be difficult. Of course, the image improves. Companies, countries that are more sustainable are more authentic in their claims to be. You might get the better people working for you. You might get more motivated human resources in your company. You might even get some efficiency wins by doing so, but it keeps very little in a transformation because you're losing much more compared to the enterprises who do not go the way. There are a lot of altruistic concerns, of course. There are altruistic goals that are there. Many people, many also enterprises, many politicians. Actually, the majority wants to improve the situation and strives towards sustainable development goals. But how can that be achieved? I'm not going along fully with the site which is actually displayed and discussed in this article. I think there are four main instruments that can put forward somehow the development of more sustainable enterprises or of more sustainable businesses and business procedures, business processes. There are norms that can be set. There are some norms that have little effect, but they are there. Norms in the way how much energy certain machineries, certain instruments can use, what material are used. You can set up norms of size, of shape. So norms actually fulfill a very important role in also setting environmental and social standards. You can have governmental legislations, speed limits, or how much energy can be used in certain circumstances. You can have a bottle system which is circular. You can have more and more circular systems in consumption. So from a legislation you can do a lot, but still it keeps limited, and at the moment both norms and governmental legislations are not fully used. What has, in my view, the biggest impact is entrepreneurs as structural agents, as the agents who actually do the sustainable transformation. Much more than consumers and users. They have power, but they are also manipulated a lot. So actually consumption goes up and up and up. It might get a bit more sustainable, but at the end of the day, I don't believe that consumers really have a free choice. They are manipulated throughout the way of making a choice all over again. So in a maturity, it gets too difficult, the information are not available that consumers really can make a fair choice. In this way, entrepreneurs are the change agents with the highest power, coming entrepreneurs, coming startups. And if the startups are confronted quite in the beginning in their business model, that they have to develop a business model that takes care of the 70 Sustainable Development Goals, then actually some real sustainable enterprises can appear. For research-wise, and if we go into business models and sustainable business plans, and however we want to call it, there is much more around than Osterwalder canvas. That's the one that is used most often, and everyone knows it. And when you speak about business models, it's the most used tool, and everyone understands that. But it is not the most advanced and most detailed ones. It is a very oversimplified business model tool to model your own business. Here you have a list of others that were published around the same time. Some are similar, some are a bit different, but when you really want to go into business models from a sustainable view and you want to develop business models, it makes a lot of sense to go into the business model literature itself. Let's say going for a sustainable business model, which of course has to take care of being economically stable, making profit, maybe not making profit, but at least having enough revenues to keep up a business running. That has to take care of the planet and of the people working for that, being around and being consumers. As we do actually, we make a strong focus at TU Berlin, that's our co-working space here, just as example, where we work together with other universities, with the public, with citizen, and we serve in this way society, environment, economy, what we actually label sustainability. So what is sustainability about when we want to define it? In the literature you find many, many definitions. Oh, of course it has to do with the environment, environmental, it has to do with the economy, economic, it has to have a societal, social side, social. Then you can mix that in whatever way. There are also definitions saying it is a mix of social entrepreneurship and profit entrepreneurship. And then we have environmental entrepreneurship. And it gets quite difficult. I mean, we made once a study coming from a social side, and we were asking in a network of social entrepreneurs in this network sent, what is actually the most important factor? What do you mean by social entrepreneurship? And we got a list. Here are the 10 most indicated variables: a positive influence on society, solution for a problem, impact as a goal, social impact, but also environmental impact. So it's a very broad field mentioned. And if we run a factor analysis on that and try to group that somehow, we end up in that. That all these variables can be grouped in societal visionary, societal entrepreneurial, innovative entrepreneurial, economic and ecological. Whereas what is apparent, and maybe it's because of a German sample, the ecological side is the ecological factor does not correlate so high with the other factors. We were long thinking about it, and probably it even has a German specific or specific of countries where the social security has been a national task, a national duty. Since the 19th century, we had the first insurances for being unemployed, having having an accident, being ill, a pension insurance, I mean, we have a lot of insurances for social security created over the last 150 years. And that means the social side is actually a national side, not an individual side. That's very different in other countries. When I look at the US or Great Britain or Scandinavian countries, the social side in the history came more from an individualistic perspective. In the Scandinavian countries, the nations or the national side or the governments took it over step by step. Now it is also there a quite governmental task. But in Great Britain, United States, social care and the social entrepreneurship activities come from the individual and are privately organized, mostly, not all. In Germany and France, now also in the Scandinavian countries, it's a governmental task to have all those insurances. When you are in problems, you have your insurance for being unemployed, being ill, having had an accident. And that maybe makes a difference in considering sustainability, whereas in Germany, it's more considered to be an ecological, environmental discipline. In other countries, as United States or Great Britain, it's more considered to be a social discipline and the environmental discipline. And if you consider the 17 social development goals, the majority has a social impact or should have a social impact rather than an environmental impact. That's one view where you have real differences when considering sustainability. Another view is the state of the art. If I look at the energy consumption, that's really dramatically different. If I look at Sub-Sahara, Asia or India, they're hardly using energy compared to Europe or United States. But certain sustainable development goals you only can achieve when you have electricity, learning at schools, proper health system, water transport over far distances, and without electricity, a lot of things do not work. So these goals cannot be achieved. In this way, building a power plant driven on coal to produce electricity would even be sustainable in some regions of this planet. It would not be sustainable here. We have an overuse of electricity and we have actually achieved the goals of health and enough water and a proper educational system. We don't need to solve these goals, which have to be solved of a lot of parts of this world, and this needs electricity. So you can actually, taking different goals out of this list of the 17 development goals, see sustainability from very different perspectives. If I look at the CO2 emissions, that are actually the countries where a lot of the sustainable development goals have been achieved by producing a lot of electricity and using a lot of resources that lead to the emission of CO2. In this way, considering sustainability from a South American or African perspective is very different, and I would address very different goals than the goals that are addressed in Europe or Northern America. The next thing is when we speak about carbon neutral or climate neutral or CO2 neutral, it's of course all terms do not work and all terms are not precise. Taking a car takes material, producing this material at least leads to a storage of CO2. So in this graphic we are by durable carbon. That's all material what the car is made of. All that material contains a certain quantity of carbon, which will be released over hundreds of years or some decades. It takes a very long time. Unless we are in a circular industry and reuse everything which was used by the car. even if you produce all single parts of a car and drive this car carbon neutral, which we are far away from doing that, then we would not be carbon neutral at all. Because even if we don't have emissions by the production and use of cars, a car needs space to drive and park, and that's 80 square meters. So we take away living carbon possibilities, this positive carbon, this absorption capacity of the soil, of the ground, we take it away by building streets. So whatever we do, a car will never be carbon neutral, CO2 neutral, or climate neutral. Nothing will ever be neutral. And that's something we always have to keep in mind. Nature is able to store a lot of carbon and to absorb it. We can store it in different goods. In a lot of plastic and a lot of different materials, we have already stored it, but it will be released over time. Doesn't matter where we store it. And we have emissions. We accelerate, we propel by using some machines, by living standards, by producing electricity and energy. So there are three parts we always have to consider. And humans will always be negative in using CO2. The only thing we can consider is using less and less, minimizing what we use. Therefore, terms as carbon neutral or CO2 neutral or climate neutral should be avoided because they are not true. Taking all resources together draws a quite dramatic picture. Actually, we need not even half a year to have the resources we should use, as Germany already used for an entire year. So we are far away by any satisfying situation nowadays. So that needs a dramatic change. What we do now, we talk about a lot, we enact sometimes something. We have signed declarations as in Glasgow. We are going in this direction, but still we are far away from that. When we go all through this discussion, we slowly come to something which will be very important in the future for politicians, but also for every enterprise and for startups entering a market, and that's being authentic. Being authentic in what we claim, when we want to be authentic and saying we are a sustainable enterprise, you have to make it true and you have to be truly sustainable. We nowadays speak about quite educated users and customers, and with every matrix that develop over time, it will be possible to get a whole picture of the business which is running at companies. It's a myth that you can hide many things in 10 years. You will not be possible to hide so many things. So being authentic in a way that you really do what you claim. There are so many examples that companies speak about green, speak about sustainability, speak about CO2 or climate neutral. There's nothing behind that. That might work now, but it will not work as the situation worsens in the next decade. And by being authentic, which means more or less being reliable, trustable, having morality, being responsible, having some ethical standards, you will attract the smartest people working for your company. You really make it advantage as company when you are authentic, and you will gain some effectivity and some efficiency by doing so, by having the better stuff in your company and working for you, by also having more customers and users that have a look at that. So in the sense, that will be a development, and that will be extremely important for startups coming up, because it's an advantage having that. That's a competitive advantage, being authentic in contrast to many corporates nowadays that are not authentic. There's research done talking about the types of entrepreneurs. I don't know if this classification holds, But you have a very general picture presented by Valley and Tyler into visionary champions, ethical mavericks that are value-driven, that are people who want to go for a sustainable transformation without economic returns, and you have people believing that innovating, doing something new also can result in economic returns and a sustainable transition. That's economic and also philosophical discussion whether both are actually possible in the right way. You have other classification in change-oriented, financially oriented, ethical oriented, innovation oriented. People are different and there are very different motivations to start a green enterprise, that's for sure. But if we really find those types in reality as they appear in the literature, I'm not sure there will be many mixed types, and whether that's so important to classify the people who actually go for green entrepreneurship, I don't know. My impression is that the majority of people who start up enterprises nowadays, at least from universities, want to give them some sustainable stamp and footprint. How did that develop? I mean, the first not noted here was the Club of Rome in '72. And then we had this hole in the ozone layer caused by humans, which were discussed in the 80s a lot. And you had the first real summits in Rio and Kyoto talking about climate change and the results of human activity on this planet. Also, green businesses started in tourism. The business started in organic food. Also, cosmetics. You had a lot of things starting up at this age. Sometimes it was questionable what's really green or what isn't really green. The business models were questionable, but at least there was a business starting from that. Also NGOs, charities, a lot of financial institutions started to have green funds to allow investments in green papers. Still, it's can hardly be evaluated. It's really difficult to distinguish them. Nowadays, there's a flood of things declared as being green or sustainable coming. It's really difficult because sustainability is a very difficult issue to consider. Here are some definitions of sustainability, also bringing together social, societal side, political side, environmental side, and economic side. Whatever definition you are going to, you end up with the three sides in different ways. Actually, where we are heading to is a change of the entire economic procedures. We have to actually change the system towards maximizing impact nowadays and minimizing profits. That's extremely difficult to go there. There's so many implications around. It sounds so easy, but it is a long way to go. There are also enterprises. Some enterprises developed as being green and ended up being sold to larger corporates. So there's so many examples of starting out being green and then changing, adapting to a more profit-seeking culture as existent nowadays. But it's very difficult in the current economic system being really green and being really different and having a sustainable, also economic business model. How do we evaluate sustainability? Yeah, you have, of course, the general measurements from accounting. You can take financial means, as we have always done, but then we are measuring a sustainable enterprise as an enterprise 50 years ago. Is it the right way? Not fully, I guess, because we are not capturing any impact. We are just evaluating financial performance. On the other hand side, there are models on sustainable return on investment and other means that developed over time to actually capture impact much more than purely financial performance. We had one attempt in our research a couple of years ago together with Schwab Foundation, where we were measuring the extent of effect. What effect does it have? What impact does it have? Beneficiaries, how many people are affected? Adaptability, can it be copied? Geographic expansion. So we took several variables which are important for social enterprises to be measured first before we actually measured financial return and financial independence. Also, the definition of social enterprises is rather difficult. Charities living from donations, yes, they can be really social. Then you have hybrid organization, having some revenues, but also having some donations. A lot of companies are state or publicly subsidized, as for instance a theater in every town. You cannot, most theaters are living on subsidies and having own revenues. And they certainly have some social impact. So in this way they are a kind of social enterprises in a hybrid structure. And you have companies having full revenues, but also being somehow social, at least in their visions. It's extremely hard to define what's a social enterprise. We distinguish the three parts. Non-profit, hybrid, non-profit, profit, or profit. And we were measuring, as you have heard often in those lectures here, networks as independent variable and this outcomes as dependent variable. We were taking data from Schwab Foundation and taking a hierarchical linear modeling where we have the three types, non-profit, hybrid, and profit, and we are taking a normal HLM regression model. And in this model, you can see that all networks, network quality, how close are the contacts, how frequent the contacts, and how big the network is, widespread, all had a positive effect of beneficiaries, tangibility, the extent of transformation, and the widespread, the size of the network also had a positive effect on expansion and adaptability. And that all varies in these three groups. So it is different for non-profit, profit, and hybrid organizations. So that's a kind of research where we actually developed our own performance measurement scale with new variables, independent and very different to variables used before. That are the main results again. Another research stream we are working on is sustainable return on investment. And that has been tried and operationalized several times. The tricky point by doing that is the investment. How much time is spent from startup members to actually being invested in that measurement tool? I mean, how much information flows in there? How easy is access to this information? So actually, startups shouldn't have any effort with doing so. And in this way, we were building it into a lean entrepreneurship procedure with hypotheses. So testing it again and again, having one measurement tool, self-evaluation, having an external evaluation, then you refine your hypothesis, test it again and again. Within a very short period of time, you can get more and more sustainable, and your business model can get more and more sustainable, as we have displayed it here. We are doing that now in a test phase at the 3 Berlin universities and will extend it certainly in the future. That's something which can really be used, can be monetized, can be put into clear numbers. Another research we are in goes into the different views on sustainability again. Just take yourself. If you say you have a startup in chemistry or a startup in digital industries, you would say chemistry is dirty, digital industries is clean. Actually, must not be true. I mean, if you look at digital industries, they are thriving on bad working conditions in several countries. They have a high energy use. They widen the problem between the richer north and the poorer south, because all are settled in the richer north. They even jeopardize democracy. They propel consumption. But coming back to the prisoner's dilemma, the rationale is, I'm a hero when I'm financially successful. I'm a unicorn. I get money much easier when I'm financially successful. And in this way, as IT startup, I would be completely stupid being sustainable, because nobody cares. I'm sustainable by definition, and I get more money when I'm profit-driven, and I am worshipped when I'm profit-driven. Why should I be sustainable? And the results actually show that digital technology startups by far only go for economic goals, not for social and not for ecological goals. Behind these goals, you have the sustainable development goals. That's also true for artificial intelligence startups. So what you see, and that's a database, it's the Berlin startups, there are more than, population is more than 5,000 startups in Berlin. What it says is, okay, yeah, it does not make much sense being an IT startup and being sustainable, because I'm sustainable by definition. I don't have to be more sustainable, which actually has the implications that at the current moment, digital technology is not a driver of sustainability. In contrast, it prevents sustainable developments of startups. Another research we have done and we have been diving in is the type of ventures, the type of people behind ventures that might be different for sustainable ventures, that might be different in fragile countries than in Europe, where entrepreneurs always considered to be a very extrovert guy, a very, very champion-like guy, being a driver, as we see as many ego-centered entrepreneurs at Google, Amazon, Tesla, and so forth. And what we find is actually quite different. We have gone into the characteristic personality of entrepreneurs. We have gone into entrepreneurial behavior, managerial behavior. We have set up a row of hypotheses, as we have done always. We have set up a conceptual model, and we were analyzing that all, entrepreneurial behaviors, managerial behaviors, and we have set up a line, and conscientiousness turns out to be the most important variable, as also a behavior variable, as you can see in this table, which is different. You would not find that so much in Europe, but which makes a lot of sense. So, wrapping up, here are the articles. I would like you to read them all. I have presented a bit of research we do in the direction of sustainable entrepreneurship, and I hope you see how complex that field is, how complex the definition of sustainability is, how complex the measurements of sustainability are, and how complex solutions might be in the future. Thanks a lot.